recognize or see someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder as a glass house.
Oh, yes.
Because, right, they're fragile, but they're trying to act as though they're sturdy. But if one thing, cracks, one thing breaks their view of themselves, they fall apart.
Right.
And
Right.
that's really what's going on.
Well, yeah, it's the self that they created, but it's not a true self. And so, and they're very afraid of somebody seeing their true identity. So they've created this facade, although they wouldn't call it that, so that others can see them a certain way. And it's like what they see in the reflection in the mirror is, not the same, not who they were created to be. They make up this entire persona and then they act it out.
They do. And then you have to wonder why is somebody doing that? And a lot of it comes to the upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't someone want to be seen fully? And there's two types of upbringing. Now, again, these are just ideas of how. Doesn't mean that it will, that these kinds of upbringings will then lead to someone with narcissism. But it makes you more at risk.
Mm.
And so one of those is that it is an abusive upbringing. So things like emotional abuse, physical abuse, and neglect, and then sexual abuse. So all of those can lead to. So emotional abuse, you might find children who've been told to shut up. I'll give you something to cry about. Don't be a sissy. I don't want to hear it. Like that. All their needs are kind of given a negative reaction,
right,
by the caregiver.
No matter what they do, they're still stupid.
Exactly. Yeah. So they learn to be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make any stir so that I don't get a reaction. I don't have needs, right? I don't have needs. I'll take care of myself. The physical abuse, we all know what that can look like. Same with sexual abuse. And then neglect, whereas you're just ignored. The child is just ignored by the caregiver. So the same kind of message of your needs are not important. You're a burden. You're annoying. You're not worthwhile. These are the kinds of things that can lead to a wound,
Mm-hmm.
a narcissistic wound. And you'll hear that term a lot in psychology, the narcissistic wound. And what happens, though, is that these kinds of upbringings plant a lie or multiple lies in the person. And that's where Satan comes in, because when we have a lie, Satan likes to twist and distort that so that it consumes us.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Well, that's how he finds his way into our purview, I guess, tempting us to do things. And when it comes to narcissism, it's feeding our ego. So building ourselves up, whether it's through lying or cheating or stepping on other people to get what we want. Yeah, creating an illusion. And so very crafty, Satan's find that wound and knows how to manipulate our thinking in a way that we tend to allow that guidance towards making bad choices, because it's our choices that build up who we are. Only we have this moral code that we're called to live by. And so when Satan is involved, his job is to keep us from staying true to that moral code. And we're easily pulled in either, in the downward direction, because we're constantly working to overcome original sin.
Absolutely. And if you think of, yes. And if you think about it, that's what happened in the garden, is
Yeah.
Satan came in and distorted and manipulated Eve into, well, no, this isn't really who God is. God's just keeping this from you. What can happen with these wounds, these lies that are implanted in us when we have this kind of upbringing, is that we get a wound that not only gives us a view of ourselves, but that can give us a view of God. So if our caregiver is abusive or neglectful, we might then view God as abusive and neglectful, because we're translating that on our poor caregiver experience onto God. And then we might avoid God, be angry with God, reject him because you have felt caregivers have rejected you. So this is where also Satan can get in, because this is a way for him to disconnect you from God using this lie.
Right. And that's important to know, because we are engaged in a kind of self-making by the choices that we make. And we are what we will. And so that gets very tangled into, willing the good choice over the not so good or the evil choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, but not only abuse is what leads to this. So at least more evident abuse. When we think of abuse, we do think of emotional, sexual, physical neglect.
Mm-hmm.
Another kind of upbringing, and that is when a child is overly coddled or pampered or undisciplined.
Yes.
So maybe in this household, no doesn't mean no. So they can just push and push and push and they'll get their way eventually. Maybe they're given anything they want without having to work for it. No boundaries. Maybe the caregiver always goes to fix things. Like, I think of schools, right, where a child gets a bad grade because they got a bad grade. And then, caregiver swoops in and says, how dare you give my child a bad grade? And all of a sudden they bully the teacher into giving a different grade, or
Right.
giving another chance, right? So the child is learning that some of these lies might be, I deserve what I want. I'm special. I'm better than everybody.
Yeah. And we can rewind that. I mean, take it back. By the age of 2, we have a very strong will. And 2-year-olds are the most narcissistic beings I've ever met because it's all about me, 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 me. And if their parent is not there actively, constantly teaching them, not everything is about you, and no, you can't have everything you want, no matter how big of a tantrum you throw, that there plants the seed as to how they will continue to, develop themselves into the person they're going to be. So it's important that's why so many parents have such a stress about what do they call them, the terrible twos. I think they're terrific twos, because that's when you have your opportunity as a parent to form the person that you're going to release into the world when they're, of age. So it's,
Yeah.
Keeping the virtues at the front of that parenting and making sure that that is what's developing, and getting your child to see, that we share and we take care of each other. And if we make a mess, we have responsibility. We pick up the mess.
Mm-hmm.
When mom says no, it means no. When dad says no, it means no. And, those things, it begins when you're right around 2 years old,
Yeah.
that you can start to implement the virtues, the teaching of the virtues. Before, of course, you're modeling it in how you care for your child, your infant. But when they're starting to make their own decisions and getting around on their own, that is when you begin to really, implement virtuous living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so important with child development. And if you think about how scary the world would be if you've been given the message all your life that I can have what I want, I deserve everything, and no doesn't mean no. And then they go out into the world as an adult and it's filled with no's. It's filled with no's. And so in order to combat that, they've developed this personality disorder that is aggressive and egotistical. And it's a way to try and force the world to treat them the way that they have been given the message they are supposed to be treated.